Welcome. This is the podcast series dedicated to living a revenue culture. This is the first in a transition period. For those of you who've been with us for a while know that the revenue game started these, and our purpose is to help organizations realize that if they really want to maximize profit, they first have to optimize people. And the reason this is a transition, as of last month, the revenue game is now part of TTI Success Insights. And the revenue game, for those of you who've been here for a while, know our expertise is creating, using revenue science, a business context that removes the cost of chaos. So it's an easier, simpler, more exciting place to work. And TTI, who's even been around longer, they've been around 40 years, revenue game was 35. They know how to help humans maximize their lives, be innovative, creative, add value. So it's a great combination of context and how to help people actually get better. So welcome to the new part of the podcast. And our guest today is David Doerrier. And I had the chance to meet David a few weeks ago and just had a wonderful call and thought he's got to be on this podcast. He's a communication expert. He helps people enhance presentations to be more engaging. And he believes that any audience can be engaged and that you can master the art of presentation. And I know for a lot of us, that sounds like, wow, can you really do that? And part of it is he believes that it's not just about can you go up and talk and can you have your hands right and all that kind of stuff, but it's can you really resonate, get to know the individuals in the audience and speak to them personally. His background is wonderful. He's going to share some of that with us today. He's run his own businesses over time. He's done voiceover work. He's been a radio station owner. He's been an actor and an instructional designer, performance specialist. And someplace in all of that, he found time to do 28 years in the Air Force and retire from the Air Force. So welcome, David. I'm glad to have you here.
Well, thank you so much, Rick. It's a pleasure to be here. And it seems like just yesterday when we first met and we had a great conversation, and I'm happy that I can be here to contribute to your podcast.
Well, you got to start by giving us a little background in both some of the things you've done. And what I found fascinating in our one-to-one was how they've contributed to where you are today.
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
I'd love that background for the group, and then we'll talk about what you're doing today in detail.
So it's interesting that you keyed in on how each one kind of built on the other. It all started with the Air Force a year after high school. I grew up in Long Island, New York, and the Air Force took me around the world, a total of 28 years, 10 years active and 18 years in the reserves. But my dream, my goal, my love was growing up as a kid. There was something about radio that just fascinated me, and would go to sleep with that transistor radio underneath my pillow and just dream about radio. And it became an opportunity for me while I was still active duty, probably at my 8-year mark when I was stationed on Guam. Long story short, I went down and I visited. I knew the DJ. I met the DJ that was working the weekends, and he brought me down there and showing everything was records, very manual back then in the early 80s. And I went in, I kind of learned the ropes and so on, how to read a music wheel and cue up music and all that stuff. Less than a week later, I get a call from the program director, and he says, "Hey, somebody quit on the weekend. Would you like a job?" And I was on the air in less than a week after that. I was doing Saturday nights and Sunday afternoon. So let's keep this somewhat short. So radio became now a part of my life, something that I was a distant thing. Was this thing ever going to happen? And so now I was coming up to reenlistment at my 10-year mark. I got stationed. I left Guam and I went to Northern California and was working part-time for a station outside of Travis Air Force Base in Vacaville, California. And I came off active duty, went in the reserves, and started working full-time for radio there in California, and went back to Guam. And this was my third time on Guam, and I was working full-time on Guam for a while.
I have to admit, I've never heard a story where you start in Long Island, want to get in radio, and have to go to Guam to get there.
Yeah, I went to another island.
Uh, so talk about, because communication is more than, queuing up a LP or, that kind of thing. You got a lot deeper into communication than just the technology and, that part. Share a little bit about how you got into that and some of the things that the takeaways for you there.
Yeah. So as far as I guess I can come back to, yeah, we'll talk about the how I ended up where I'm at today. So I was still in the Air Force Reserves, and radio, I found some of the fame, but none of the fortune. So luckily in the mid 90s, the Air Force Reserves, because I had been active duty in this career field in air transportation, was in the same career field in my reserve unit. I was doing some informal training within the unit. Let me also say that I have a theater background. I got involved in theater, community theater, and that became a real big part of my life for a long time. So I had these things under my belt. I'm doing some informal training in my unit. My first sergeant comes up to me and says, "Hey, there's an opportunity for us to send you to Marietta, Georgia, to be an instructor, to start training people that are coming into this career field in the reserves for the first time." And this is where I started learning the craft of what is training. It's not just throwing it against the wall and hope it sticks. All these things I had to learn, but I found right away that I it's like Michael Bublé says, he was built for this, for what he does. And it's the same thing with me. I feel like I was built for this. I get it. I understood objectives and the importance of objectives, and eventually learning that there's a process to engage an audience. It didn't happen overnight. I'm saying it happened, but there were some things that happened early on that really opened my eyes to training as not just talking and telling.
Yeah, you're the instructional design piece. I think that's one that gets very a short shift, that people don't pay much attention to that part. Did the Air Force help educate you in that space?
Yes, so I'm glad you brought that up. So me now coming into this training unit, I come in as a subject matter expert. So my role was two. I was the instructional designer and learning the craft of instructional design as well as facilitation on a daily basis. And that's an interesting question. The Air Force never trained me on instructional design, but I did go to two classes on how to be a facilitator. But I would say that there's many things that I've learned about instructional design that benefit me as a facilitator, about understanding objectives and transitions and creating an opening, and why are we here? What is the purpose? What are we doing? What value does this have? Those are things that are written into to instructional material.
Yep. Yeah, it's interesting. You're on a couple of subjects. Instructional design is one, and you use the term facilitator. And
Right.
it's interesting because today, so many of us are used to talking heads,
Yeah.
and facilitation is so different. And whether, my one of my passions, I really love doing work with clients where I'm on the selling side. But to me, selling is about facilitating.
Yep.
It's about understanding who the people are I'm talking to, and I don't do that by talking at them. And then there's almost always not one person I'm selling to. I mean, if you're going to ask somebody for $1 million or $5 million, there's going to be 10 or 20 of them.
Yeah.
And their backgrounds are completely different. There's
Yeah.
somebody from accounting and engineering, and somebody from HR, and somebody from compliance and procurement. And how do you facilitate all of them to understand a common problem and work to a socially acceptable solution that makes their world better.
Yeah.
And
Uh,
wow,
So you brought up the facilitation. I'll come back to that question in just a moment about how you have you have this diversity in the room. Everybody learns differently, everybody communicates differently. So we'll come back to that, but using the word facilitation, because I see myself, whether you use the word trainer, facilitator, whatever, to me, it's all about guiding the conversation, guiding us to our objective, our destination. And the way that I like to train is I want to challenge my audience and I want to use them to help us get there. And so this may answer some of your question let's use it in a training scenario.
yeah,
We have people that know nothing about the process, and you have people that know a lot
yeah,
about the process. So first, I want to identify who is my audience up front. I can do that by asking questions. What is your experience? Maybe there was a survey. But if I have experienced people and we're talking about a process, well, Rick, you mentioned earlier that you've been using this process for a long time. When you get to this point right here, how do you move forward, or whatever specific question? And then I want to recognize that expertise that you have. So, I mean, there's a lot more to it there, but how do you take a room full of people that all are different and we all want to get to one objective? Well, first we got to identify the objective. Why are we here?
yeah,
One question, again, there's a lot to this, but one question I've used recently in a class that you've all read the synopsis about this class today. What was it in that synopsis that said, I need to go to this class? I need to go to this breakout session. And that's how I opened it up. And they started talking about what their needs were.
yeah. And it's interesting. To me, that and I'm going to ask this as a question: is facilitation a teachable skill?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I believe so.
And is
Because that's what I'm teaching. Yeah, I'm teaching my clients. As a salesperson, you said it earlier, as a salesperson, you are a facilitator. You're
yeah,
using these same principles that are in here. And we could talk about some of them using the same thing. A keynote speaker has to create that trust with their audience, has to create that reason for me to listen. Wow, that was cool. I want to know where we're going with this. I see the value of listening to this guy.
and combine for us for a minute the instructional design with the facilitation, because I'm sure there are some people think, well, instructional design, they're writing a script and I'm going to go deliver the script, but
Right.
facilitation's really different. How do those things come together?
So in a way, you have I'd rather call it a lesson plan and now you've got your outline. So the facilitation is all the stuff in between the lines of how do I motivate first I got to motivate them to want to learn. So yeah, your lesson plan can give you ideas and maybe you can read it word for word. Today we're going to learn this and you're going to do this and you're going to do that. But understanding the value of creating an opening and what importance that has in there, creating that principle of ownership that that you've created an opening to the point where the people say, I see the value. I understand where we're going. So that's the stuff that gets in between all of those lines.
Yeah, creating an opening. I'm thrilled that you mentioned that because I think that's hard for a lot of people. They
Mhm.
think if I'm in the front of the room, we can't have silence. I can't give up my energy or my momentum. I've got to keep going. Talk a little bit about that, creating that opening.
Yes, you asked some great questions, and also buried in there was that being afraid of the pause. And yes, that's something that people have to get used to. There's power in that pause. Not The pause will always seem 10 times longer to the speaker than it does to the audience. I learned that when I was an actor on stage, that you drop a line and you feel like it's like 8 hours later. Oh, it came to me, but it was like a millisecond, but it felt like that you were standing there forever. But there's power in the pause, getting comfortable with the pause. The more comfortably, there's a lot of things that contribute to helping people work through anxiety. One of them is the pause to help slow them down, to decrease the pace. Many times people being nervous, oh, you're talking really fast and this and everything else, and not realizing that they're doing that. So one of many ways to help with that anxiety and to keep your mouth is not going faster than your brain. So let's go back to the other thing that you said, which now all of a sudden I forgot.
Oh, the matching of the instructional design with the facilitation.
So yeah, I think we talked about that the facilitation is all the stuff in between the lines. It's all the stuff in between the lines. And there's a lot of it.
So David, tell me today, and maybe it's just I'm getting old enough that it feels this way, but it certainly seems like there's so much we have to learn today. And we have to, not only do we have to learn it, but we have to pass it on to other people. So as a precursor to asking you about the work you do today, talk a little bit about the need for this ability to communicate and listen and get to, people talk about cooperation and collaboration. And to me, those two are very different things. And I don't think in general we collaborate well because we don't hear the other people. So can you talk a little bit about just the general community and the importance of the kinds of things you do? Then I'm going to ask you to share what you really do.
Okay. So using TTI as an example and using that disc, I think one of the things that I observed while facilitating disc for a number of years and training people to be trainers is not understanding that we're all different, that I learned this way, then everybody else learns exactly the same way. So I would say that it comes back to knowing your audience and disc is one of those ways to recognize what is my value and then or what is my communication style, and then have an appreciation for all those different styles. Now I got lost in this and I forgot the original question.
Just the importance today, since there's so much new information coming at us. And even though I'm not a trainer or nobody defined me in my job skill as a facilitator, it seems like I spend 70% of my time doing those things. And, most of us aren't trained on that at all. And even though some of us have been trained, we haven't been trained real well. So what do you see and what learnings do you have or, ideas for us?
So now I remember where I was going with that. It was first having an appreciation that in your classroom, whether it's virtual or face to face, that everybody in that room is different. And you along with understanding your audience is also assessing what is their current knowledge of the subject. Again, I can't assume that everybody is in the same place.
Right.
What I'm envisioning here is a classroom full of 10 or 15 people. Now, when you're one-on-one, you still need to assess, if you're mentoring someone, assessing their current abilities, assessing where are they at, understanding their learning style, adapting to their, well, meeting them halfway. DISC is, I'm not, yeah, I'm going to meet you halfway. So, yes, it's knowing the audience and uh, having that appreciation for the differences.
So now, David, tell me what, you've been an actor, you've owned a radio station, you've done all these things. What are you doing today?
Right. Well, let me clarify one thing. I never owned a station, but I did work at several different radio stations as a music director and an on-air DJ and so on. I'd love to own a radio station, and we can talk about that some other time. So what am I doing today? Because of my background in training and development and working with these principles to help engage an audience, I found that these same principles can help any presenter, because it's all about engaging your audience. Whether you're selling to someone, you want to create that rapport. I want to understand what it is you need. I want you, the prospect has to come to the conclusion, I need that. I can't convince you that, Rick, you got to have this thing. If you don't use this thing, then you're never going to get this or that or this thing or the fancy car. So I learned that these principles work with anybody. And then I started helping people with their speeches and Toastmasters and found I really love doing this. So today I'm working with all types of subject matter experts that all have the same problem. They all want to, they've recognized that whatever they're doing now is not working. They're not connecting to their audience. They're not getting that emotion transferred to their audience. They're not getting the sales. They're not getting the people to come to the back of the room to buy their book. They're not keeping them excited. Zoom is another. I can't feel my audience. How do I do this? So that's what I'm doing. Then the people are creating workshops. They're creating multiple day events that I'm helping them with, because that instructional design, I'm so grateful that I ended up in this career field.
Wow, the Zoom thing. Wow. I was an in the room presenter, speaker, trainer for decades, and all of a sudden you're on Zoom constantly. What are some of the things that you advise any of us to do, since Zoom's probably not, or something like Zoom's not going away?
Yeah.
We're a more virtual world than we've ever been, and if we truly want to do global business, we're going to have a breakfast call with somebody who's 4,000 miles away. What kind of advice do you have for us? I'm assuming it's not about the technology.
Some of it is the technology, and I'll focus on a couple of things with the technology. There's many things that project credibility to your audience. And in Zoom, there are technical things that will convey credibility. For example, eye contact is looking directly into the camera. Yes, I agree. There are times you may have to look away. I've got 4 screens if you include that one back there. At minimum, I would say that during your introduction, during transitions, asking questions, answering questions, your conclusion, those are at minimum, you're looking directly into that camera. Telling stories, looking directly into that camera. So that's a technical thing, but there's a difference. I'm sure you can see the difference now. I'm looking directly into the camera. But how many times have you seen someone doing a presentation and they're looking over here, or they're looking over here and they're doing their presentation? So you got to look them right. Yep. You got to look them in the eyes. It takes practice. And this is something that I feel that radio helped me with. And that, to me, radio is theater of the mind. And in radio, I'm in a room just like this, sort of, kind of, but you can't see me.
Right.
And so now I've got thousands of people all over the community that are listening to me. And I learned about in radio, it's an intimate thing that I talk to my audience as if I'm talking to one person. How are you today? How was your weekend? I'm so glad that you're with me today. Coming up, we got some great songs to help you go through this or whatever. Keep it like that. Now I get a phone call and somebody requests a song. And now I heard that voice. And in my mind, I think that person looks a certain way. Maybe I asked a couple of questions, are you home? Or something like that. So now I put that person in their house. And I'm using that theater of the mind, and now I'm talking to that person through the microphone.
Wow.
And I feel that helped, because the thing that people tell me with Zoom is I can't look in the camera because then I can't see the faces. I can't see the people. I'm not talking to the people if I'm not looking in their faces.
I'd be one that would say that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I mean,
so there's one technical. Another technical is understanding the technical aspects of Zoom. I think people are much more comfortable with it now, but I'm sure there's people that are, maybe learning how to transition to a PowerPoint, how to mute everybody when you got that one guy that's, talking back here and we can all hear it because they didn't mute themselves. How do you mute people? How do you kick somebody out if you got to kick them out? So it's getting comfortable with those transitions and those basic skills when it comes to Zoom. Those are credibility. Why won't you shut that guy up? Why won't you mute? I can't listen to the speaker. All I hear is this guy over here making all kinds of slurping noises.
yeah, it's you open your bag of potato chips and start crunching, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, I want to look in your eyes, and I have a hard time focusing on the camera rather than your eyes. And that's, I guess, a habit I've got to break.
Well, I have a camera that's called Center Cam. I have no association with these people whatsoever, but it's a very thin camera, has great light. I don't have to add any additional light. It's normal. It's not dark in the room. I've got a couple of lights in here, but I don't like a lot of light. So it gives me a good look. It's called Center Cam, and you can adjust the height of it. It's clipped onto the top of my monitor, and you can adjust it. And right now I have it pretty much right at the top of your head. So I'm looking you right in the eyes right now, but it probably doesn't look much different than now looking right into the camera.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Not discernible at all.
Right.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, because that's one I struggle with, because I want to see your facial expression. I want to, watch your body language.
Yeah.
Because that's what I would do if I were in the room with you.
So, the way that to do that would be to ask a question of that individual where now they've got to talk through stuff that's going to give you that body language, that vocal hesitancy or something like that. One thing I teach in training is the 70-30 rule. And it could be, it could be appropriate in others, like for in sales or mentorship. Let me ask this question. So if a facilitator needs to incorporate a 70-30 rule into their facilitation, what do you think that means?
Guessing who talks 70% of the time and who listens.
Okay, great. Who's talking 70% of the time?
The person on the other end of the Zoom call.
That's right. So the facilitator is facilitating 30% of the time. I'm going to facilitate us through this discussion, and I want you to talk 70% of the time, because my main objective, well, it depends, my main objective in this case is that when we get to the end, you realize that, yeah, there are some new, David does have a bag of tricks that could help me with my skills.
David, that's interesting. I got a readout from one of these AI bots that captures your Zoom call the other day. Almost the first thing on the list is who talked which percentage of the time. And I was a lot closer to 50-50 than I wanted to be. And, so that gave me an indication I got to go back and be more intentional about when I'm listening or how I'm getting other people to talk.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Great questions.
Yeah, so that's great feedback. So when you look at the world today and you see the people that you're training and um, you kind of review whatever literature you're reviewing, what what should we be teaching our new employees and our senior people? What should we know that we don't know? What habits do we need to rewire so that we get more engaged with the other person and less ego driven, or however you want to say it?
Yeah. This is a great question. I was asked this type of question the other day, and it at the foundation, whatever solutions have been presented or implemented in the organization, that the objective is to create an environment that's safe, that's where everybody feels safe enough to be vulnerable, to feel safe to make a mistake. uh, this has to be continuously reinforced. It's not something that's a one and done. Okay, everybody, here's how you do it. All right, have a good lunch. We'll see you later. It's something that has to continuously be reinforced, and all of those things have that all has to be created. How do we do this? But at the core of it, it's creating that safe environment where we can be all vulnerable.
Interesting. Yeah, I can see how, as you were talking about DISC earlier, that it makes a difference when we fundamentally understand the people we're talking to, because we're so much more accepting.
Yeah.
And, that I always feel safer when somebody accepts me for who I am.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think you talked about earlier about meetings, that I'm sure there's a lot of if you understand everybody in the room, and there's that one quiet guy that sits in the back of the room before disc there. And I asked this question early on in the disc training, and give that scenario about that one guy that's in the back of the room that's quiet. What is your perception of that guy?
Yep.
And I get a variety of them, and sometimes it's accurate. Well, maybe he's just quiet. Maybe he's a good listener. But a lot of times I get he's not a team player. He's somewhere else.
Yeah, he's working on his phone.
Yeah, yeah. Or you've got that one guy, that high C, that every time David is here, he always throws a wrench into the works. He always picks something out over there, and we thought we were done with this project, and now he saw this thing. He's always sabotaging us.
Yeah, it's amazing that that's how people interpret it, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So I think that in an organization, yes, you've got to know your people, and it comes back to that you have to communicate to their listening. I was always, I have one incident in mind of when I was training disc, and there was that D, that high D in the room that got it, that and I'm sure in all the D's mind, they think that they're coming across this way, but I'm doing this. I'm compassionate. I am thinking about them, but a lot of people have a very different perception of that, especially that S person, where the D, if you want to give the D feedback, just give me the meat and potatoes. Don't give me the fluff. Just give it to me with both barrels. I'll fix it and I'll move on.
Yep.
Well, that's how the D gets feedback. So now it's time for me, that D, to give feedback to the S.
That's not a safe environment that way.
No, no.
So, David, as you first, I want you to tell me, who is your ideal client? Because I'm listening to what you're teaching or you're sharing with us, and I'm realizing that almost everybody can improve in this space. This is not something that either individually or organizationally, we're at 100% of our game. That's not how we're playing. How do you recommend and what do you do to help people make this, part of their continual development?
Great question. So you were asking as well in there, who would be the ideal client? Was that
Yeah.
part of this? I think I mentioned this earlier, is that the first thing that has to happen before I can be effective is that the organization or the individual has to recognize that something ain't working right. And there needs to be an improvement. So who do I best work with? As you mentioned, there are a lot of people that I can help, even the professionals that want to just get a tune-up where I can make some suggestions on try this type of opening. How about incorporating this? Incorporate a transition here. What about a story? Because from the outside looking in, I see doors that other person can't see. So who's the ideal client? A group of trainers, IT trainers especially, that have transitioned into the role of IT or even sales because of their experience, because of their years in the organization, because of their background. That's why they were transitioned. And they haven't been exposed to how best to engage an audience. Where this type of person who has not been given this opportunity to learn facilitation, they come in and vomit on their audience. So highly educated IT, they've got to communicate their message to a non-technical audience.
So my last question to you is, what advice do you have for kind of new people coming into their careers, and this is either their first or their second job, and they're trying to figure out how do I learn to communicate with the people that I'm around? And then the same question, but for the senior leaders, those people who, they have the responsibility for their organization, and not all of them are great communicators, or they don't make it safe for everybody around them. What advice do you have for those two groups?
Well, first, for the individual who's new, uh, having the ability to speak effectively in public is a skill that can be used universally. It can be used in so many different settings. As I mentioned earlier, there's many ways of demonstrating confidence or demonstrating credibility to an audience. And that person that can get up in front of an audience. Let me also say that being nervous, if you're nervous before you speak, guess what? You're normal. It's normal to be nervous. But what it takes is understanding the foundational skills of how to work through that nervousness and the basic foundational skills of speaking in front of others. Mastering that and being able to get up and to give an impromptu speech, or somebody in a meeting, the CEO says, well, Rick, you've been working on this. Tell us all about this thing. Not that you would do that, but I think it's the foundational skills of speaking in public is in both scenarios. Again, you've got the CEO of an organization. I just started working here, and now I got a guy that owns this company, and all I hear is looking at the floor. What the hell's this company? Where are we going?
Wow. Well, David, I want to thank you for being here today. It's been fun for me, and you absolutely have got me on two or three things I've got to start practicing and working on, and habits I got to change. So I thank you for that. And just any last words you want to leave us with?
Last words that I would like to leave your audience with is that you asked me earlier, can facilitation be trained? Yes. And I think it's understanding what is the value of connecting to your audience. And once that you understand the value here. What is that by incorporating this into your facilitation, you will see a dramatic change.
Well, I thank you. And for all of you that have joined us today, I hope you had as much fun as I did and learned as much as I did. And we'll see you the next time. Thanks for joining us.